Thank you. Thanks. Well, Jackson, there you go, it's right working. Cool. I saw a few hands up there. Who are not-for-profits? I just didn't get it because I was fiddling around with my microphone. Not-for-profits. And who's small business here? Or medium? Medium? Small? Small or radio? Cool. Lovely. And who is on social media at the moment? Who's actively using social media as a tool for their business promotion? Could you just put your hands up? Just wave them around. No, thanks. That's great. Today, what I wanted to talk to you about was, really the simple stuff of how do you actually do the content? How do you get it on there? And what do you need to do to make it work for you? So it's about engaging content, obviously. But some people, first of all, ask, why do we do it? Well, it's everywhere. We know that. Your kids are on their iPhones. Everyone's distracted. It's the first thing that you do when you wake up in the morning. It's pretty obvious why we're on social media and why your business needs to be on social media. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. As Ange described earlier, there's a plethora of platforms that we've got available to us. There's a new one every day. If you look on the App Store, there's new platforms. And so it's actually really confusing to people about what medium you approach to convey what you need to do about your business. I'm going to concentrate on 3 main platforms tonight and a little bit about just general approaches to content. Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. There are obviously other ones and we'll cover them briefly. So obviously the main ones are Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, which I will go through in some detail. There's also other video focused platforms like YouTube, Flickr and Vimeo, and Vine and Tout. Have any of you experimented with any of those for your businesses? No? Any of you have? Great. Any of you obviously using Twitter and Facebook at the moment? Put your hand up if you're using Twitter. And if you're using Facebook? Great. And who's on LinkedIn? Most people, yeah. Because as we know, the statistics indicate that Canberra's a LinkedIn town, which is great. Instagram and Foursquare, they're sort of different platforms which, sometimes if you're a business that sells stuff and you're a location-based business, like you're a coffee shop or you're a restaurant or something like that, Instagram and Foursquare are great. You can show photos and engage with people and actually get them to come to where you are. So they all do different things. So we'll focus on the first 3 tonight. Generally, some stuff about content and tone. One of the things that I always say to people when I'm talking to them about content is really talk authentically. There's no reason and it's not logical for you to try and project that you're cooler than you are or that you're more smarter than you are or that you're dumber than you are. Be authentic. Have an authentic voice of your business. So if you're a veterinary practice, talk authentically about what you do with your animals. If you're a small business, a cafe, talk about your clients and what you do in your day-to-day business. Talk really realistically about what you do. Make it reflect what you do day-to-day rather than try and sort of conjure up an image of what it is that you're not doing, because I think people will find you out and you'll be uncovered as a bit of a sham if you don't have an authentic voice. I always say to people, communicating the small stuff, not just the big picture. So if you're a cafe, you want to talk about, obviously with people's permission, perhaps who was in there and some stuff that was going on in the cafe, or the sort of coffee that you've got pouring, today. Rather than just saying, we got some new chairs delivered yesterday. Obviously thinking about what it is the picture that you want to conjure up about what it is that you're doing. Encouraging feedback and being responsive. So, one of the things that Ange was talking about was, IINet had a site that they created where there were people online actively responding to people's questions and feedback. Some people don't have the resources to do that. I mean, who here has the resources to have a 24-hour, feedback line in terms of the business, or do you need it? You probably don't need it. But if you do engage on Twitter or Facebook, have the capacity to respond to people. And, there's obviously different privacy settings, so you can have those set in whichever way you want. Being, of course, wary about what that means if you're completely open and allow people to post openly on your Facebook site. But if you are allowing people to engage with you on Facebook, for example, be prepared to respond to them and have that engagement, because it's by those conversations that you're actually getting to know people. They're getting to know you. You're having a personality. it's displayed. A friend of mine, a client of mine, the Diversity Council Australia CEO, who's now working with Westpac, when she got onto Twitter and I hands up, got her onto Twitter, she's now one of Australia's, she's got about 20,000 followers. And she's developed her following absolutely through Twitter and Facebook, Twitter mainly. She's one of Australia's best known leaders in sort of employment, in the employment space, in terms of the women and diversity employment space. And she's done it entirely through Twitter. Twitter is a real way of you carving out a niche for yourself as an individual. So if it's an individual-focused business, you want to create a persona for yourself, it's you that's front and centre. Twitter's a great way of doing that. So is Facebook to some extent. But Twitter is a real way of you having a voice at a high level and really injecting that voice into the sector or the area that you're working in. Keeping it personal is really important. So, you know, not just a sort of static thing saying, you know, this is our new announcement on the new 23 jobs that we've employed in Canberra today. What is it that's really exciting about those 23 jobs? Who are those 23 people? They're people. Talk about the people. Talk about the impact of what you've done on those people. Bring it to life, and it really does have a real great power, I suppose, as it does when you open a newspaper or listen to it on radio or TV. What's more interesting when you hear a radio or television story? It's about the personal stories that really brings that to life. Using pictures and links to videos. I'll talk about this in a second in terms of some of the stats that really tease out some of the really interesting things about using videos and pictures. They're a really strong and powerful way of conveying what you do, and very, very clickable. And obviously encouraging your staff and your community to contribute. You've got to have some boundaries around that, and you obviously don't want to encourage or give free range to all of your staff to be on Twitter and Facebook, particularly after a night at the pub on a Friday night. So you obviously need to have some, you know, strictures and some policies about that within your own company, and have a think about the ethical boundaries that you set up about that. If you've got a number of people who are doing social media, maybe it's just a small number of people. So you need to obviously give some thought to those sorts of things before you head sort of way into it too much. Let's talk about Twitter. As I said before, you know, why Twitter? It's free. Everyone's there. It by and large, it's a really good medium for this town, and we know that. This is a very, you know, educated town by and large. It's very, you know, middle class. It's very professional. Twitter is a great platform for this city. It's really fast and it's efficient. My husband is the chief photographer at Fairfax, based at Parliament House. And my children often say to him, "Dad, get off Twitter, just get off Twitter." And his theory is now, I mean, when he first started as a photographer 25 years ago, he used to, you know, print his own photos, you know, in the field. Now, he says if it's not on Twitter, it's not news to him. There are stories breaking on Twitter, and they break on Twitter before they break on a news site. Twitter is where things are breaking in terms of news. So I'm not saying that you all want to be breaking stuff on Twitter, but it is a really, particularly for this city, it's a really engaging medium. And if you can grow your following on Twitter, I think it is a really good way of being able to get your message out there, depending on what it is you're trying to say. It's great for networking, so it takes some work. It's about growing that support base. You know, it's not something you get onto day one and then all of a sudden it just works. You've got to get on there and really actively engage with people. You've got to follow people. Not just follow them, you've got to say something. It's like if I walked into a room here and I didn't talk to you, and I'd go home and I'd say to my husband, "Well, no one talked to me." And he'd go, "Why?" And I go, "Well, I didn't talk to anyone else, but, you know, maybe they could have come to..." It's a bit like that. When you're at a party, you've got to talk to people. So Twitter's a bit like a party in some respects. I mean, it's a strange analogy, but you do have to relate to people. You've got to have a conversation with them. It's not just sitting there tweeting. It's about relating to people and having an engagement. It's great for engaged, intelligent stakeholders. That's what we are in Canberra. Obviously, we all are. Obviously, you all are intelligent and engaged. And it's great to be able to dig down and get a bit more information. On Twitter itself, if you look at Twitter, there's a glossary of the terms. I can't go through them all here tonight, we'd be here for the next 2 hours in terms of the terms of hashtags and whatnot. But there's a lot of terms if you want to get your head around the exactitudes of a tweet. In basic terms, using more action words, more verbs and fewer nouns is really important. And the top two things that have been indicated in recent months or recent time is that if you offer a free download, free content, or if you ask people to retweet. Free content is a great thing to do. Obviously, if you say, got some great content, click here to buy it, versus click here if it's free, what do you think people are going to do? So it's a bit of a no-brainer. Depending on what you're wanting to do, what your business is, if you're a coffee shop, go back to the coffee shop. Maybe it's just a recipe for how you're going to use the coffee. It's about thinking about inventive, creative ways of engaging people on social media rather than just being inert and just telling people stuff. People are not just receivers of information. They need to be able to think about how they're going to use it when you give it to them. So in terms of some of the other bits that you can think about with Twitter, good tweet should, obviously we all know it's very short, it's only 140 characters. So, a recent study found that a shorter tweet is actually much more readable or more readily read, if you like. It has 66% more engagement. Use no more than 2 hashtags per tweet. You've probably all seen funny videos of people saying, hashtag this, hashtag that, hashtag this. You can take it from the sublime to the ridiculous. But, hashtags, if you're engaged, for example, as a small business, any of you engaged with the budget at all? Either the Canberra budget or the federal budget ever? At all? None of you? Some of you? One or two? Those sorts of things often those sorts of events have hashtags. Last year at the Canberra Centenary, I'm sure some of you had interactions with that. There would have been lots and lots of hashtags through the year. So those sorts of things can often be useful. Avoiding slang and abbreviations. Sort of jargon, I suppose, that only you know about. Talk in terms that anyone can understand. The simpler, the better, to be honest. If you read a newspaper story, it's really pitched at a very simple audience. It's not overly complicated, and that's a good way. It's a good approach for a tweet. Don't be afraid to use symbols, to shorten them. An ampersand for and, for example. They can save you space if you're trying to shorten it down to the 140, and we've probably all been there trying to shorten a tweet down to 140 characters or less. So let's move on to Facebook. Who here is on Facebook for their business? Yep, cool. And you're finding it useful, by and large? Yep. Talked about pictures. Twitter now functions in some ways like a mini Facebook. If you look at Twitter and a Twitter feed, photos pop up in Twitter. So photos are really sort of king, if you like, for both Twitter and Facebook. Obviously, with Facebook, it's sort of, if you're looking at it on a mobile, if you're looking at it on a laptop, photos are really important. They're front and centre. So using pictures in a whole lot of ways is a really good idea. Posting pictures to Facebook works well if the pictures are self-explanatory. So because we're all busy, we're getting bombarded with a lot of information. So if you can get something that's really clear and instant, then that's going to be a lot more communicative as a device for you than if it's a whole lot of people in a room doing something that you're not quite sure about. So, think about the photo that you're going to use before you use it. A recent study found that posts with photos had 53% more likes and 104% more comments and 84% more click-throughs. That was something in the last month or two that Facebook has published. Using numbers and simplifying things like, the top 5 reasons to buy coffee, or I'm going back to my cafe, but, 10 tips to, whatever it is, something to simplify it. People are attracted to those sort of simple things. They're practical and they're easy to read. Using numbers rather than words and place the number at the head of the post. It drags people in. It does bring in an attention to your post. We'll move on to LinkedIn, and I think most of you in the room are on LinkedIn, and it's a great platform. And what's really interesting is I think people don't use it to the best of their ability. A number of our clients, particularly in Canberra, having engaged us specifically to improve their social media profiles, including LinkedIn. And what we found is even partners of quite large businesses have radically different LinkedIn profiles. They're, some of them have got photos back to the sort of 1980s, and it's sort of very inconsistent. So you've really got to think about what you look like when you're looking at it from a sort of an external point of view at your profile. So think about that before you go any further. The statistics are amazing. I think it was 59% in Canberra, which is a great, huge statistic. So that's a no-brainer. If you're not on LinkedIn, you probably should get on there. For each and every one of you, no matter what you do, there will be a community of interest on LinkedIn. And I'll take you through some of the things that you can get involved with. But the statistics are quite extraordinary. Some of them are just there. I don't need to take you through those. You've just seen them. But Canberra in itself is a strong LinkedIn town. So can you read that? I'm not sure whether that's a bit dark. But LinkedIn, there's a number of things you can do. Not only do you put your CV onto LinkedIn, but there are things that you can use LinkedIn for. So it's not just about an ability to be able to be found on LinkedIn. It's about an ability to be sought out for job offers, to make offers to other people, to participate in groups in your own space, and there's thousands and thousands of them. You can create your own group. For example, if you've got a specialty in a particular area, if you're doing something that's particularly interesting, you can really do use LinkedIn in some respects like Twitter. You can put on posts, you can post content to groups or onto your own LinkedIn feed. I've got about 4,000 people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a bit like, a bad virus in some respects. Once you get to about 500, it just goes. And the only people I don't connect to on LinkedIn is people that are from some remote country that I can't identify the name of, and I go, I'm not quite sure about you bloke, so I'm not going to connect with you. But if they've got something that's sort of connected to me in a broad sense in some of the areas that I'm working in, I'll connect to them. It's not such a personal, for me, it's not such a personal platform. Facebook is for me. Twitter, it's more of a professional, sort of intellectual engagement. For me, LinkedIn is a group of people that I'm sort of speaking to, but it doesn't, to me, feel like it's a dangerous, terribly personal platform. So for me, I'm quite happy to have a very, very big LinkedIn community that I'm speaking to, because for me, it's not a negative. That's how I find it. For you, it's up to you really how you want to use it, but there's lots of different ways you can do it. Making sure that you can be found, obviously, search yourself or search your company on. You can have a company or a business page on LinkedIn. Search that on Google and make sure that it can be found. You can build your own community by establishing a group or joining other groups. And it's a really very personal research tool. If you're trying to find out some information about a competitor or another person, what's the first thing that you turn to? I always turn to LinkedIn and have a look at what they've been doing. It's a very, very powerful research tool. So just some troubleshooting before I finish. Generally, in terms of social media, the biggest thing I can say is really be authentic. Reflect what you truly do and what you truly think, and how you behave in your own day-to-day business is the best way of telling people how you work and what you do. Engaging positively and avoid arguments. You've all heard of some terrible things that have happened on social media, and yes, there are negatives. And if that happens, there's obviously ways, and there's ways you can shut those down. It's probably not for tonight to talk about that, but you can always report abuse to the different mediums, to Facebook or Twitter or to LinkedIn. I've reported people on LinkedIn, for example, who were removed. They were, contacting women. You can always report abusers, and it's not just if you go out to the pub on a Friday night, then you go home and you tweet prolifically. Pause for 10 seconds before you send out a tweet or a Facebook post. Have a look at it before you sort of get on there and do it to sort of rapid fire, because you just, you might make a spelling mistake and that reflects badly on your business. It's as simple as that. But B, it's just making sure that it really reflects what it is you're thinking. There's no anger in there, no malice, that it's a positive thing, or you might be having a robust discussion with someone online. You just really don't know what it's going to be. But making sure that you review it, pause for a few seconds. As I said, don't engage when you're not in the right state of mind. Code for drunk or whatever. And make sure that you understand what's expected of you. Are there protocols in place in your own business, or your own? If you're responsible in your own company or your small business for social media, make sure that you know what's expected of you. What the voice is, Ange talked about the voice. What's the voice that you're expected to adopt in using social media? It's really important. So a couple of basics. Make sure you use it. A lot of people, as others before me have said, you get on there and you set it up. You set up a new business and you decide to go into social media and you set up Facebook and you set up a Facebook page and you set up a LinkedIn group and you've got all this stuff and you look at it and you go, actually, I can't resource this. It's too scary, or it's too scary. So what I say to people is, do what you can do. Resource what you know you can resource, and don't go mad doing it. Don't put yourself under stress doing it. If you can only tweet once or twice a week, because that's all you can fit in, that's all the content that you can come up with, just do that. Do what you can manage, but make sure it's really good when you do it. In terms of Facebook, use pictures, use some video. Some of the things that I referred to before, Vout and Vine and Tout, are little video online apps that you can use that produce really short content, video content. Twitter is really useful for short message bursts or event updates. YouTube, if you want to go there, have a think about that. Flickr and there are other ones that you might like to think about. But make sure that you resource it properly. Do what you're going to do, but do it well, because you're not going to inform anyone if you're silent and if they're sitting there looking at a Twitter feed that's empty. So what you do need to do is do it well, but do it authentically and effectively. So thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. There you go.